Welcome to Her Voice Echoes, where we share the raw, real stories of women who faced the unthinkable and found the courage to rise above it. Today, I'm going to tell you about Margaret Reynolds, Maggie to those who know her heart. At 60, Maggie's a retired nurse, a woman who spent her life caring for others. But this story, it's about the night her own children tried to cast her aside, and how she turned their betrayal into her triumph. Picture this, a crisp November evening in 2024. In Maggie's Riverside home in Wisconsin. The house glows with warmth, polished oak floors. A chandelier casting soft light over a dining table draped in ivory linen. A fire crackles in the hearth, and the air carries the scent of roasted turkey and sage. It's Thanksgiving, and Maggie's poured her heart into this meal, just as she has for decades. Maggie's a striking woman. Her short, golden blonde hair catches the firelight, and her green eyes, sharp and knowing, hold stories she's never told. She moves with the quiet confidence of someone who's seen life's highs and lows. Tonight, she's wearing a deep emerald dress that hugs her frame, chosen not just for elegance but for courage. Because tonight, Maggie knows, will be her last as their mother. The table is set for 12, her 3 grown children, their spouses, her 4 grandchildren, and her. The spread is a labor of love: golden mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce from berries she picked herself, pumpkin pie with a crust so flaky it melts on the tongue. She's spent days preparing, her hands steady from years of stitching wounds and soothing fevers. But as her family gathers, laughing and chatting, there's a tension in the air. Whispers, glances, a plan Maggie's already sensed. They think she's too trusting, too soft, too desperate for their love to see what's coming. They're wrong. Something's brewing tonight, something that will shatter their world and set Maggie free. The fire in the hearth snapped softly, casting shadows across the dining room. My children sat around the table, their voices mingling with the clink of silverware. But beneath the chatter, I could feel it, a cold current, sharp as a winter wind off the Wisconsin River. My 3 grown children, Daniel, Sophie, and Lucas, were here with their spouses and my 4 grandchildren. They laughed, passed the gravy, complimented the turkey, but their eyes told a different story. Daniel, my eldest at 39, sat at the head of the table, where my late husband Henry used to sit. A bank manager with a slick smile and a sharper ego. He carried himself like the world owed him everything. His wife, Claire, a polished brunette, pushed her green beans around her plate, muttering about how rich my cooking was, as if I'd laced it with gold. Sophie, 36, my only daughter, had my green eyes but none of my heart. She was a freelance journalist, always chasing the next big story. Yet tonight she barely looked up from her phone, tossing out snide remarks about the old-fashioned way I'd set the table. Her husband, Tom, nodded along, a quiet man who'd learned to agree rather than argue. And Lucas, my youngest at 33, the dreamer who never grew up, a failed startup founder. He leaned back in his chair, his new girlfriend, Mia, clinging to his arm. He checked his phone every few minutes, as if my home-cooked meal was keeping him from something more important. I served the pumpkin pie, still warm from the oven. When Daniel stood up, he cleared his throat, that commanding tone he'd perfected in boardrooms, the one that demanded attention. "Mom," he said, his voice steady but cold. "We need to talk." I set down the serving knife, folded my hands, and smiled. "Go on, sweetheart." He glanced at Sophie, then Lucas, their faces a united front. "We've been discussing things," he continued, "as a family, and we've decided, you're not part of it anymore." The words landed like a slap, though I'd braced for them. The room went still, even the grandchildren, too young to understand but old enough to sense the weight, froze. Sophie smirked, her phone finally forgotten. Lucas nodded, as if discarding his mother was as simple as signing a contract. Their spouses shifted uncomfortably, but they didn't speak. They'd known this was coming. They'd planned it. I looked at each of them, my children, who I'd raised, loved, sacrificed for 36 years of birthday parties, late-night fevers, and endless support. And now, they sat there, ready to toss me aside like an outdated piece of furniture. My heart raced, not with pain, but with anticipation. They thought they'd blindsided me. They thought I was too soft, too trusting, too desperate for their love to fight back. Oh, my darlings, they were so very wrong. The silence in the dining room was heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. My children's words, "You're not part of this family anymore," hung in the air. Sharp and cold, the fire in the hearth flickered, casting long shadows across their faces. Daniel stood tall, proud of his announcement, as if he'd just closed a deal. Sophie's smirk was a blade, cutting through years of my love. Lucas nodded, his eyes darting to his girlfriend, Mia, for approval. Their spouses sat frozen, complicit in this betrayal. My grandchildren, bless their hearts, looked confused, sensing something was terribly wrong. I let the moment linger, my hands folded calmly in my lap, my face serene. They thought they'd broken me. They thought I'd crumble, beg, plead for their love. Oh, how little they knew me. I stood slowly, smoothing my emerald dress, and walked to the sideboard. From a velvet-lined drawer, I pulled out 3 small oak boxes, each one polished to a warm glow, each one engraved with a name, Daniel, Sophie, Lucas. I placed them gently before each of my children, my movements deliberate, my smile soft but unyielding. "Since we're making announcements," I said, my voice steady as the river outside, "I have a gift for each of you. A little clarity for the future." Daniel's brow furrowed, his lawyer instincts flaring. "What's this, Mom?" Sophie turned her box over, her smirk fading into suspicion. Lucas just stared, his fingers hovering over the engraved lid. "Open them," I said, settling back into my chair, my heart pounding with the thrill of a plan unfolding. All at once, "If you please." They exchanged glances, unsure, but curiosity won out, as I knew it would. The sound of wood creaking filled the room as they lifted the lids. Then, the screams began. Sophie's cry came first, a high, piercing wail that sent her youngest daughter scrambling under the table. Daniel's face drained of color, his hands shaking as he pulled out document after document. Lucas cursed, a string of words I hadn't heard since his teenage years, his box spilling its contents onto the table. Inside each box was a reckoning, evidence of their crimes, Daniel's embezzlement from bank clients, Sophie's forged signatures siphoning money from our family's charity fund, Lucas's scams using my name to secure loans for his failed ventures. There were photos, bank records, even a recording of Lucas bragging to his friends about milking Mom dry. But that wasn't the worst of it. Tucked among the papers were DNA test results. Cold and undeniable, no biological relation to Margaret Reynolds. And a letter, revealing the truth about their father, Henry, and their real origins. They weren't adopted from anonymous teenage mothers, as Henry had told me. They were the children of his old college friend, Laura, who died in a plane crash when they were small. Henry had taken them in, lied to me, made me their mother to hide his past. And the final blow, legal documents, already filed, dissolving my adoption of them. No more family, no more inheritance, no more me. Claire, Daniel's wife, gasped, reading over his shoulder. This can't be real. Tom, Sophie's husband, stared at the photos of her misdeeds, his face a mask of betrayal. Mia, Lucas's girlfriend, clutched the recording, her eyes wide with horror. The grandchildren clung to each other, too young to understand but old enough to feel the chaos. I sat there, cutting a slice of pumpkin pie, my voice calm as I said, "Oh, it's real, my darlings, every word, every page, and this is just the beginning." To understand why I sat so calmly at that Thanksgiving table, watching my children scream as their world unraveled, you need to know how I got there. It wasn't a sudden decision, no impulsive act of anger. It was years in the making, a slow burn of betrayal and discovery that turned a trusting mother into a woman who'd had enough. Let me take you back, to the beginning, to the girl I used to be. I was born Margaret Ann Carter in a small Minnesota town, where the winters were long and the dreams were quiet. I was 24, a young nurse with a knack for soothing frightened patients, when I met Henry Reynolds. He was 42, a brilliant architect with a smile that could charm the stars from the sky. I was smitten, swept up in his world of grand designs and grander promises. We married in 1988, and I thought I'd found my fairy tale. Henry gave me everything, a beautiful home by the river in Wisconsin, dresses that made me feel like royalty, A life I'd only dreamed of as a girl. But fairy tales, as I learned, often hide shadows in their corners. Henry wanted children right away. I did too, eager to fill our home with laughter. But after 2 years of trying, with no baby to show for it, my heart began to crack. Henry, ever practical, said we'd find other ways. He handled everything, using his connections to arrange private adoptions. Within a year, we had Daniel, a chubby-cheeked boy with eyes like a storm. 2 years later, Sophie arrived, all curls and curiosity. Then Lucas, my bright-eyed baby, completed our family. Henry said they came from young mothers who couldn't keep them. And I believed him. I signed papers I didn't fully read. Trusted his assurances that it was all for our protection. I was 28 when Lucas came. And I threw myself into motherhood with everything I had. For years, I was the mother I'd always wanted to be. I bandaged scraped knees, baked cookies for school fundraisers, drove to soccer games and piano lessons. When Daniel won his first debate, I cheered until my voice gave out. When Sophie wrote her first poem, I framed it. When Lucas fell off his bike, I held him until the tears dried. Henry, though, was different. He loved the children in his own way, distant, demanding, expecting them to reflect his success. He was gone often, sketching buildings across the country, leaving me to be the heart of our home. I didn't mind. I thought love was enough. When Henry died of a stroke 7 years ago, at 67, I thought grief would pull us closer. I imagined my children leaning on me, as holding each other through the loss. Instead, they saw an opening. It started small, Daniel questioning why I needed such a big house, suggesting I downsize for my own good. Sophie, always sharp-tongued, commented on my clothes, my hair, how I was too old to live so extravagantly. Lucas, my dreamer, came to me with endless sob stories, failed startups, bad investments, emergencies that always needed my checkbook. At first, I helped without question. They were my children. If they needed me, I was there. But the requests never stopped. The gratitude never came. They treated me like a bank, not a mother. The breaking point came last Easter, when they gathered at my house for brunch. I'd spent days preparing ham glazed with honey, fresh baked scones, a table blooming with tulips. As I served dessert, Sophie spoke up, her voice casual but cutting. "Mom, we've been talking. It's time you thought about your future. This house, this lifestyle, it's too much for you." Daniel jumped in, his tone smooth as ever. "There are great retirement communities nearby. Smaller places, more suitable for someone your age." Lucas, avoiding my eyes, mumbled about how I'd be happier with less to manage. I set down the dessert tray, my hands steady despite the ache in my chest. "And what happens to your father's estate?" I asked. "The investments? The trust funds?" They exchanged glances, the kind that told me they'd been planning this for months. "We'd handle it," Daniel said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Take the burden off you." That night, alone in Henry's old study, I made a choice. If my children saw me as an obstacle, I'd remove myself, but not in the way they expected. I'd play their game, and I'd win. I hired a private investigator, Lydia Tran, a no-nonsense woman who'd spent years unraveling lies. I wanted to know who my children really were. What she found was worse than I'd feared. Daniel was skimming money from his bank's clients to fund a secret gambling habit. Sophie had forged my signature to drain our family's charity fund for her own shopping sprees. Lucas was running scams, using my name to secure loans he never intended to repay. My children weren't just ungrateful, they were criminals, using me as their unwitting shield. Then came the deeper cut. In Henry's study, buried in a locked drawer, I found papers he'd hidden for decades, adoption records, medical files, letters between him and his lawyers. The truth hit like a freight train. My children weren't from anonymous mothers. They were the children of Laura Bennett, Henry's college friend, who died in a plane crash when Daniel was 5. Sophie 3, and Lucas just 1. Henry had taken them in, lied to me, made me their mother to cover his past. For 36 years, I'd raised another woman's children, believing they were mine, and now, those same children wanted to discard me. That's when I decided to give them exactly what they asked for, but on my terms. The truth about my children, and the lie I'd lived for 36 years, settled over me like a heavy fog. I'd raised them, loved them, poured my heart into every moment, only to learn they weren't mine, not by blood, and that their father, Henry, had built our family on a foundation of deceit. But it wasn't the betrayal that changed me. It was their choice to cast me aside, to see me as nothing more than a means to an end. That Easter brunch, when they suggested I retire to a home and hand over their father's estate, lit a fire in me. I wasn't going to beg for their love. I was going to show them exactly who they were dealing with. I started small, deliberate, like a nurse checking a patient's chart before surgery. First, I hired Lydia Tran, a private investigator with a reputation for digging up truths people thought were buried forever. Lydia was sharp, her eyes missing nothing, and she approached my children's lives like a puzzle to be solved. Her weekly reports were a gut punch. Daniel, my confident bank manager, was neck-deep in gambling debts, siphoning money from client accounts to cover his losses. Sophie, my clever journalist, had forged my signature to drain our family's charity fund, using it to bankroll her lavish trips and designer wardrobe. Lucas, my dreamer, was the worst, running scams, taking out loans in my name, even bragging to his buddies about how easy it was to tap mom's wallet. They weren't just ungrateful, they were thieves, using my love as a blank check. While Lydia gathered evidence, I met with Ellen Parker, a lawyer I'd chosen carefully, no ties to Henry's old firm, no loyalty to my children. Ellen was in her 50s, with a no-nonsense demeanor and a knack for estate law. We spent weeks restructuring everything Henry had left me, the house, the investments, the trust funds. I made sure every asset was untouchable, locked away from greedy hands. But the real work was in the adoption papers. Those documents, hidden in Henry's study, were a maze of lies. Ellen pored over them, her face growing grim. "Maggie," she said, "these adoptions were built on fraud. Henry misrepresented everything. You have grounds to dissolve them." I leaned back in her office chair, the weight of those words sinking in. Dissolve them, legally erase the family I'd built. How long would it take? I asked. If they don't fight it, she said, a few weeks. If they do, it could drag on. But Maggie, this is permanent. Are you sure? I smiled, a small, hard smile. They told me I'm not family. I'm just giving them what they want. Over the months, I played my part, the sweet, naive mother they thought they knew. But every interaction was a chance to gather more, to chip away at their confidence. When Lucas called, desperate for $20 to save his latest startup, I asked questions. What's the investment? Can I see the paperwork? Have you talked to a financial advisor? His voice grew sharp. Mom, it's complicated. I just need the money. In the past, I'd have written the check. This time, I said, maybe it's time you face the consequences of your choices. The silence on the line was deafening. He hung up, furious, but I felt a spark of victory. For the first time, I'd said no. Sophie was next. She called about our annual Chicago shopping trip, assuming I'd foot the bill as always. I've booked us at the Drake, she said, her voice dripping with entitlement. The usual stores, too, Nordstrom, Saks. You're paying, right? I sipped my tea, my voice calm. Not this year, Sophie. If you want to go, it's on you. She laughed, then stopped when she realized I wasn't joking. What's wrong with you? First Lucas, now this. Are you okay, Mom? I smiled into the phone. I'm better than ever, darling, just learning to prioritize myself. She didn't know what to say to that. Daniel was trickier, he was always the smartest. He showed up at the house one October evening, a bottle of my favorite Pinot Noir in hand, his smile as charming as ever. Mom, I'm worried about you, he said, settling into Henry's old armchair. You've been different, distant. We're concerned this big house is too much for you. I looked at him, this son I'd once carried on my shoulders, and saw a stranger. Are you suggesting I move somewhere smaller? He nodded, all sincerity. A retirement community, maybe, somewhere you'd have friends, activities. It's what's best for you. I took a slow sip of wine. What's best for me, Daniel, or for you? His smile faltered, just for a second. He left without finishing his wine. By November, I was ready to test them. I invited them for a casual Sunday dinner. Nothing formal, just roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans from my garden. Comfort food, the kind that reminded them of their childhoods, when I was the mother who lived for their needs. Halfway through the meal, I dropped my first hint. I've been thinking about family lately, I said, cutting my chicken with care. What it means, is it blood, love, or just how we treat each other? Daniel's fork paused midair. Sophie's eyes flicked up from her phone. Lucas shifted in his seat. I've been researching our family history, I continued. Genealogy sites are so advanced now. They can trace your roots back generations. Don't you ever wonder about your real parents? The silence was electric. They'd always known they were adopted, but we rarely spoke of it. To them, I was mom, Henry was dad, and their origins were irrelevant. We don't need to know, Daniel said, his voice tight. You're our real mother. I smiled, letting the moment stretch. Of course, though I did find some inconsistencies in your father's adoption papers. My lawyer's looking into it. Sophie's face paled. What inconsistencies? I waved a hand. Oh, probably nothing. Just details that don't add up. Makes you think how fragile family ties can be, doesn't it? They left early that night, their unease palpable. Over the next week, their calls came, nervous check-ins, fishing for clues about what I knew. They thought I was slipping, maybe losing my grip on reality. They had no idea I was building a case, sharpening a blade, waiting for Thanksgiving to let it fall. The dining room was a battlefield, the air thick with the wreckage of my children's screams. The oak boxes lay open, their contents spilling across the table like a spilled secret. Sophie's wail echoed, sharp and raw, as she clutched photos of her forged signatures. Daniel's hands trembled, his face ghostly pale as he reread the bank records exposing his embezzlement. Lucas's curses filled the room, his box spilling a recording of him laughing about scamming me. The DNA results sat at the heart of each box. Stark and undeniable, no biological relation to Margaret Reynolds. And the legal papers, already filed, severing our ties forever. But the deepest cut was the truth about their father, Henry, and their real mother, Laura Bennett, whose family had been searching for them for decades. I sat there, calmly slicing my pumpkin pie, as their world collapsed. Claire, Daniel's wife, whispered, "This isn't real, is it?" Her voice shook as she read the evidence of his crimes. Tom, Sophie's husband, stared at photos of her lavish trips, funded by stolen charity money, his silence louder than any shout. Mia, Lucas's girlfriend, pressed a hand to her mouth, listening to his recorded voice mock me as a desperate old lady. The grandchildren, bless them, were too young to grasp the chaos, but their wide eyes darted between their parents' panic. I'd timed this moment carefully, waiting until they'd eaten, knowing the kids would soon wander off to play, spared the worst of this storm. Daniel found his voice first, his lawyer instincts kicking in. You can't do this, Mom. You can't dissolve a 36-year adoption on a whim. I tilted my head, my voice soft but steel-edged. Not a whim, Daniel. Fraud. Henry lied about your origins. The adoption was built on deceit. And the law agrees with me. Sophie's eyes blazed, her hands shaking. We'll fight this. We'll drag you through court. We'll say you're not in your right mind. I smiled, the kind of smile that stops a room. With what, Sophie? Your accounts are frozen. The IRS is already auditing you for fraud. Tom's filing for divorce and seeking full custody. What exactly do you have left to fight with? Her mouth opened, then closed, the truth sinking in like a stone. Lucas, his face red with rage, leaned forward. How long have you known? About the scams? The money? The recording? I took a sip of wine, letting the question hang. Long enough, Lucas. Long enough to know you called me a cash cow to your friends. Long enough to send every piece of evidence to the FBI, the IRS, and the Wisconsin Banking Commission. The room erupted again, shouts, accusations, desperate pleas. But I wasn't done. I raised my hand, my voice cutting through the noise like a blade. There's one more thing you should know. About your father. About your real mother. The silence was absolute. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. You weren't adopted from strangers. I said, you're the children of Laura Bennett, Henry's college friend, who died in a plane crash when you were small. Her parents, your grandparents, fought for custody after her death. They wanted to raise you. Love you. Keep Laura's memory alive. But Henry took you away. Changed your names. Moved across the country. Built a lie to hide you from them. Sophie made a choking sound. Daniel's jaw dropped. Lucas just stared. His bravado gone. Your grandparents are still alive. I continued. They live in Seattle. They've been searching for you for 30 years. Their names. Their number. A letter they wrote when I found them. It's all in your boxes. I stood, smoothing my dress, my purse in hand. This house is sold. The new owners move in January 10th. I suggest you collect your things before then. Though your legal troubles might make that tricky. I paused at the dining room door, looking back at the family I'd once loved more than life itself. Happy Thanksgiving, my darlings. I hope you enjoy the lives you've chosen. Their screams followed me as I walked out. Into the cold Wisconsin night. To the car waiting to take me to a boutique hotel in Milwaukee. I'd booked a suite weeks ago, knowing this house was no longer my home. As I drove away, the weight of 36 years lifted. And I felt free. As I drove away from that Wisconsin house, the screams of my former children fading in the rearview mirror, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the fragile kind that comes from pleasing others, but the deep, steady kind that settles in your bones when you finally choose yourself. I'd booked a suite at a boutique hotel in Milwaukee, a place with soft linens and a view of Lake Michigan's restless waves. That night, as I sipped chamomile tea and watched the city lights twinkle, I knew I'd done more than walk away from a toxic family. I'd walked toward a life that was mine. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of consequences for them. Not me. Daniel was arrested for embezzlement. His polished reputation shredded as the Wisconsin Banking Commission dug into his accounts. Sophie faced an IRS audit and a divorce filing from Tom, who took their children and walked away from her lies. Lucas, my dreamer, landed in jail for fraud and unpaid debts. His scams collapsing under the weight of Lydia's evidence. Their worlds unraveled, just as I'd planned, but I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I had a new life to build. By January, I'd sold the Wisconsin house and bought a small, cedar-shingled cottage on the Washington coast, near a town called Port Townsend. It was nothing like the grand riverside home I'd left, no chandeliers. No sprawling rooms, just a cozy haven with a stone fireplace, wide windows facing the Pacific, and a garden where I could plant lavender and roses. The ocean was my neighbor. Its rhythm a constant reminder that life moves on, no matter what you lose. At 60, I was starting over, and it felt like waking up. I threw myself into this new world. I bought a camera, something I'd always wanted to try, and started capturing the way the morning mist clung to the cliffs or the way gulls danced against the sunset. I joined a local photography group, where I met Ellen, a retired librarian with a laugh like wind chimes, and Sam, a former fisherman who taught me to spot whales off the horizon. They became my friends, not out of obligation, but because we chose each other. I started writing, too, pouring my story into a journal that grew into a memoir called The Last Thanksgiving. It wasn't just about what happened. It was about what I'd learned, that love doesn't mean enduring abuse. That family isn't a debt you owe forever. The book took shape over months, each chapter a step toward healing. I wrote about the girl I'd been, so eager to please, so ready to believe Henry's lies. I wrote about the mother I'd become, giving everything to children who saw me as a resource, not a person. And I wrote about the woman I was now, standing on a windswept coast, free to choose my own path. When I sent the manuscript to a publisher, I didn't expect much, but The Last Thanksgiving struck a chord. It became a bestseller, resonating with women who'd spent years carrying the weight of toxic families. I got letters, hundreds of them, from mothers, grandmothers, sisters, all saying my story gave them courage to set boundaries, to walk away, to choose themselves. One spring morning, as I sat on my porch with coffee and the sound of waves, an email arrived from Sophie. It was different from the desperate voicemails she'd left after Thanksgiving, full of tears and threats. This was quiet, almost raw. "Dear Mom," she wrote, "I've contacted Laura's parents, my grandparents. They're helping me see who I was, who I could be. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know I'm sorry. For the money, the lies, the way we treated you. You deserved better." I read it twice, my heart heavy but not breaking. I didn't reply, not because I hated her, but because my peace was too hard one to risk. Forgiveness, I'd learned, wasn't about her. It was about letting go of the pain so I could live. Port Townsend became my sanctuary. I joined a book club, where Ellen and I argued over Jane Austen and sipped wine. I took up watercolor painting, my brush capturing the ocean's moods in shades of blue and gray. My cottage filled with small treasures, driftwood sculptures, a quilt I'd sewn with Sam's wife, books that fed my soul. For the first time in decades, every choice was mine. The colors on my walls, the flowers in my garden, the way I spent my days, it all reflected me, not someone else's demands. I thought about Laura sometimes, the woman whose children I'd raised. I wondered what she'd think of them, of me, of the mess Henry left behind. Her parents, now in their late 70s, had sent me a letter after Sophie reached out. "Thank you, Maggie," they wrote, "for loving our grandchildren when we couldn't. We don't care what they've done. They're Laura's, and we'll love them always." Their words stayed with me, a reminder that real love doesn't keep score, doesn't demand perfection. It was the kind of love I'd given my children for 36 years. The kind they'd never given back. As summer came, I walked the beach each morning, the sand cool under my feet, the ocean whispering secrets it had kept for centuries. I was 60, but I felt younger than I had in years. Free from midnight calls about emergencies. Free from navigating my children's manipulations. Free to be Maggie, not a mother, not a wife, just a woman living a life she'd chosen. My book's success brought speaking invitations, podcast interviews, a chance to share my story with others. But the real gift was simpler, waking up each day knowing my life was my own. I'd traded the chaos of a toxic family for the quiet beauty of a life built on my terms. And that, my friends, was worth every tear, every fight, every step away from the past. Thank you for joining me on Maggie's journey. From a mother betrayed to a woman reborn. This is Her Voice Echoes, where we share stories of women who refuse to let pain define them. Maggie's story shows us something powerful. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is letting go of toxic ties, of guilt, of the need to fix others. That Thanksgiving night, when Maggie walked away from the family she'd loved for 36 years, she didn't just leave a house. She left behind a life built on someone else's lies. And in doing so, she found herself. Her children, Daniel, Sophie, Lucas, chose greed over gratitude, betrayal over loyalty. They paid a price: prison, divorce, broken lives. But Maggie? She paid a different price: years of love unreturned, trust shattered, a heart broken open. Yet from that pain, she built a life of quiet beauty on the Washington coast, filled with photography, writing, and friends who saw her for who she was. Her memoir, The Last Thanksgiving, didn't just tell her story, it gave countless women the courage to say enough, to set boundaries, to choose themselves. Here's the lesson Maggie's story whispers to us all. Love should never cost you your dignity. If someone, family or not, treats your heart like a resource to be mined, you have the right to walk away. You are not obligated to carry their burdens, to fix their mistakes, to sacrifice your peace for their chaos. Trust that voice inside you, the one that says you deserve better. It's telling the truth, and if you're afraid of being alone, know this: being alone is not the same as being lonely. Loneliness is staying in a room full of people who don't see you. Being alone can be freedom, a chance to live true to your own heart. If Maggie's courage speaks to you, share her story, hit that like button, subscribe to Her Voice Echoes to hear more tales of women who turned endings into beginnings. In the comments, tell us, have you ever had to set a boundary with family? What gave you the strength to choose yourself? Your voice matters. It might be the echo someone else needs to hear. Because sometimes, the most beautiful chapters of your life are the ones you write alone. On your own terms, with a heart finally free.